Whenever a floorboard creaked in Richard's house, I could see his left eyelid twitch. 78 years in this world have taught me to notice the little things. I try to walk more quietly, but the years have taken their toll. The knees aren't the same, and the gait isn't easy anymore. This morning, when I went down to the kitchen, my son was already sitting there with a cup of coffee and a newspaper. He didn't raise his head, only his shoulders tense, giving away his irritation. "Good morning, Richard," I said, heading for the coffee maker. He mumbled something in response, keeping his eyes on the paper. His wife, Marion, standing at the stove, turned and gave me her trademark smile, the one that never reaches her eyes. "Kermit, we told you breakfast was at 7. It's almost 8 now. The scrambled eggs are cold." I looked at the clock. 7:35. Time always works against me in this house. "I'm sorry, Marion. I'll cook something myself." "And make a mess in my kitchen?" She shook her head. "Just eat what you've got. And don't forget to take your pills today. You left them on the table yesterday. I put them away in your room." My room. A tiny bedroom at the end of the hallway. Richard's former office that had been turned into a place for an old man. I nodded gratefully and sat down at the desk. Richard turned the page of the newspaper with a noise like he was trying to create a wind that could blow me back upstairs. This is what my morning looks like in Williamstown, the small town where I've lived all my life. First with my parents, then with Elizabeth, my wife, and now. Now I live in my son's house, the house I helped him buy by selling my own. "Are you picking Dean up from college today?" I asked, trying to make conversation. Richard finally put the paper down and looked at me as if I'd asked if he was going to rob a bank. "It's Wednesday, Dad. Dean's coming in on Friday as usual. I was talking about it last night at dinner. I remembered dinner last night, or rather, I tried to remember." At the table, Richard and Marion were discussing bills, work, neighbors, anything but addressing me. I sat there like a piece of furniture they'd forgotten to take into the attic. "Of course, I'm sorry. I just got confused." Marion set a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me. The yolk had already hardened and the bacon had turned into crispy coals. "I don't know why you're asking," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You don't leave the house to meet him anyway." It was a reproach. Ever since I suffered a mild pneumonia last winter, they've been using my health as an excuse to keep me inside the four walls. "You shouldn't go out in this weather, Daddy." "It's too hot outside for you, Daddy." "You might fall and break your hip, Daddy." Caring wrapped in barbed wire. After breakfast, I went up to my room. Through the window, I could see the backyard. A neatly trimmed lawn, garden furniture, a barbecue that is only used when guests come over. I used to have my own garden. It was small, but it was mine. I grew tomatoes and zucchini. Elizabeth had roses. In particularly good years, we'd harvest so much we'd give it away to the neighbors. Here I can't even plant parsley without Marion's permission. I pulled an old photo album from the nightstand. The worn leather cover, the pages yellowed with time. Here was Elizabeth and me on our wedding day, she in a simple white dress, me in a suit I'd borrowed from my brother. Here's little Richard holding his first bicycle. Here's the three of us on a picnic by the lake. I'm trying to remember when things changed. When my son started looking at me as a burden instead of a father. Maybe it was when Elizabeth died. 6 years ago, cancer took her in 3 months. I was alone in our small house that suddenly became too big for one person. Richard and Marion visited me on Sundays, always in a hurry to get away. And then an idea came up. "Dad, you and Mom always said you wanted to help us buy a bigger house," Richard told me one day. "We found a great one, but we don't have enough for a down payment." I looked around. The house Elizabeth and I had bought after 30 years of working in a factory. Not luxurious, but cozy. Ours. "I could give you money," I said. "Actually," Richard cleared his throat, "we were thinking of something else. You could sell this house. It's too big for you alone, and it's expensive to maintain. We'd take you in. We'd have plenty of room." I remember how long I was silent then. Elizabeth said to me before she died, "Don't sell the house, Kermit. It's all you'll have left." But there was something in my son's voice that I hadn't heard in years, a need for me. "We're going to be one family, Dad," he added. Dean would benefit from spending more time with Grandpa. Dean, my grandson, the only person who actually gets excited to see me. At 17, he's more like me than Richard ever was. I sold the house. The money went toward a down payment on Richard and Marion's new house, a 3-story, 4-bedroom house in a good neighborhood. I even became a co-borrower on the mortgage because Richard didn't have a good credit history. I thought it would bring us closer together. I was wrong. A knock on the door snapped me out of my memories. Marion peeked inside without even waiting for an answer. "Kermit, I'm going to the store. Do you need anything?" "No, thanks." "All right then. Don't forget to take your meds. And please don't touch the thermostat. Last time you adjusted it, the heat bill was huge." She left without closing the door. Small thing, but telling. In this house, I don't even have a right to a closed door. I walked over to the window. The day was clear, sunny. On days like this, Elizabeth and I often went to the park. She liked to feed the ducks, even though the sign forbade it. "Rules are made for sensible people, Kermit, not happy people," she used to say, tossing breadcrumbs into the pond. Richard's voice came from downstairs, talking on the phone. "Yes, of course." "No, I realize the payment is late. The money will be there next week when Dad's pension comes through. No, we won't have any more problems like this. Here it is. My pension. The final nail in the coffin of my dignity. Every month I give most of my pension to pay the mortgage, a house I feel like an intruder in." Richard and Marion both work, he as a manager at an electronics store, she as a receptionist at a dental clinic. They're not poor, but somehow my pension has become an integral part of their budget. The first time Richard asked for money was a month after I moved in. "Dad, we have an unforeseen expense. Could you help with this month?" I did, and then again, and again. Now it's no longer a request, but an expectation. Every month on the 15th of the month, I give him an envelope of money. He never says thank you. Just nods as if I'm just doing my duty. The phone on the nightstand vibrates. A message from Dean. "Hey, Grandpa, how's it going? I'll see you on Friday. I'll bring you something interesting." I smiled. Dean is a bright spot in my life here. A first-year college student, he comes home almost every weekend and always makes time for me. We play chess, watch old movies, or just talk. Sometimes I think he's the only person in this house who sees me as a person, not a walking wallet or a burden. I answered him, trying not to make typing mistakes. My fingers aren't as nimble as they used to be. "I can't wait. Take care." After lunch, when the house was empty, Richard at work, Marion on some errands of her own, I walked downstairs and out to the backyard. The sun was warming the old bones and I closed my eyes, exposing my face to its rays. In the next lot, Mrs. Finch was hanging laundry. When she saw me, she waved her hand. "Good afternoon, Mr. Walsh. I haven't seen you in a long time." "Hello, Mrs. Finch. Lovely day, isn't it?" "Wonderful. How's your health?" "Better than they think I am." She smiled understandingly. She must be in her 70s, but she still drives a car and goes to the pool 3 times a week. "You know, Mr. Walsh, we have a group at the community center on Wednesdays. Board games, tea, sometimes dancing. You should come along." "Maybe," I replied, even though I knew Richard would find a reason why I shouldn't leave the house. "It's not safe, Daddy. You might get lost, Daddy." "What if you get sick, Daddy?" In the evening, when everyone had gathered for dinner, Richard announced the news. On Sunday, we would have visitors, my new boss and his wife. Marion tensed. Sunday, but I was planning to go to my sister's. "I know, darling, but it's important for my career. We need to make a good impression." His gaze shifted to me, and I already knew what was coming next. Dad, it would have been better if you had eaten dinner in your room that night. I slowly put down my fork. Are you ashamed of me, Richard? Of course not, he sighed irritably. It's just, James is a very demanding man. Everything has to be perfect. And you, well, you sometimes drop food or say the wrong thing. I understand, I said, though the only thing I really understood was that my own son thought I was a nuisance. After dinner, I went back to my room and sat on my bed. Elizabeth's picture hung on the wall. I often talk to her when I am alone. You were right, dear. We shouldn't have sold the house. I imagined her answering me. It's never too late to make things right, Kermit. But how? The house is sold, the money invested in a place where I feel like a ghost. My pension is going to pay the mortgage, and my savings are barely enough for a couple months of independent living. I'm trapped in my own naivety. The next day, while going through some old things in my closet, I came across a box of letters. Letters from Elizabeth when I was away on business trips from the factory. Letters from Richard from summer camp. Letters from friends, many of whom are no longer alive. And among them, an envelope with the deed to the house, the one listing me as a co-borrower. I read the terms carefully. My signature is right next to Richard's. Legally, I have as much right to the house as he does. I was not relieved by this discovery, only the bitterness of realizing how far apart we had become. I once held his little hand as he took his first steps, taught him how to ride a bike, worked overtime to pay for his college tuition, and now I'm just a line item on his budget, an inconvenient piece of furniture that can't be thrown away just because it brings in money. That evening, when Dean arrived from college, the atmosphere in the house perked up a little. He burst in with his usual energy, hugging me so tightly that I felt 20 years younger. Grandpa, I brought you something. He took a book out of his backpack, an old edition of Moby Dick. I found it at a second-hand bookstore near campus. Remember when you said it was your favorite book? I picked it up with trembling hands. Hardcover, gold embossing, pages with a slight yellowish tint. Dean, this is, wonderful. Thank you. Hey, is that a book? Richard came into the room, took one look at my gift. Dean, why do you waste money on stuff like this? Dad has plenty of books he doesn't even read. This is a special edition, Dad, Dean replied with a touch of irritation in his voice. And Grandpa likes to read. Sure, Richard shrugged. Just don't forget to show me your grades for the semester. We're paying a lot of money for your education. When he left, Dean rolled his eyes. I'm sorry, Grandpa. Is he always like this? Not always, I answered, even though it was a lie. Your father's just, worried about the future. We spent the evening playing chess. Dean talked about college, about his friends, about the history professor who talked so monotonously that half the group fell asleep. I listened, laughed, and for a brief moment I felt needed, important, alive. But when Dean drifted off to sleep, reality returned. I sat in my little room, looking at the paperwork I'd found during the day. Co-borrower. The word was spinning around in my head like a broken record. I remembered the bank teller explaining what it meant. You're both responsible for the payments, Mr. Walsh. If one of you stops paying, the other will have to cover the full amount. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. Of course I would help my son. Isn't that what families are for? But what if I turned the situation around? What if I stopped paying? The thought came suddenly, like a lightning strike. I felt a strange excitement. For the first time in a long time, I saw a way to regain control of my life. I put the papers aside and walked to the window. The night was clear, starry. Somewhere out there, among those stars, Elizabeth is watching me. What would she say? She was always kind, but fair. Sometimes you have to be tough, Kermit, to make people see the truth, she often said. I had made my decision. But first, I had to prepare myself. I had no illusions. If I took this step, there would be no turning back. Richard would never forgive me, but it might be the only way to regain my dignity. With that thought, I went to bed. For the first time in months, I fell asleep with the feeling that tomorrow would be a new day. A day when I would no longer be an uninvited guest in someone else's home. From the window of my room, I watched Dean load a bag into the trunk of the old Ford. Another Sunday night, another goodbye. My grandson waved at me and I waved back. A few minutes later, the car disappeared around the corner, leaving a void. The house was quiet again. The weekend flew by quickly, as it always did when Dean came home from college. We had time to play chess, go for a little walk in the park nearby, and watch an old Western on TV. But the most time we spent was in the garage, where Dean was restoring an old motorcycle he'd bought for nothing from a neighbor kid. "Can you believe it, Grandpa? I just need one part and this beauty will start," Dean said, lovingly stroking the worn gas tank. A crankshaft from a pre-war Indian Scout is rare, but I found one on an online auction site. "How much for it?" I asked, imagining my grandson riding a restored bike on the road. $250. Dean scratched the back of his head. "It's a little pricey, but this model was only 2 years old. We'll have to wait until the next scholarship." I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Dean never asked for money. He's not that kind of guy. Studying engineering, working part-time on campus, living modestly. And I wanted to give him a gift. The next day, when Richard and Marion went to work, I pulled out the stashed bank card. A little over $300, money I'd been saving little by little from my pension, for a rainy day, as they say. So I decided that a day when I could make my grandson happy was good enough for those savings. At the bank, I was assisted by a nice girl with the name tag Sarah. She patiently explained how to make the transfer and didn't even show annoyance when I had to double-check the numbers. "You're for your grandson, aren't you?" she asked, smiling. "How did you guess?" "You have such a face. Happy." She finished the operation and handed me the receipt. "Lucky your grandson and grandfather." I left the bank with a light heart. Then I went to the drugstore to get some medicine, painkillers for my back and eye drops, which Marion considered an unnecessary waste of money. On the way home, he bought a fresh baguette and a bottle of inexpensive wine. I wanted to celebrate a small victory. At home, I called Dean right away. "Check your email," I said, barely containing my excitement. "Grandpa, what's wrong?" "Just check it." I heard him click the mouse, then his amazed exclamation. "Grandpa, are you serious? $300? But I want you to finish your bike. Buy this crankshaft and the rest for yourself." "Grandpa, I can't accept. It's too much." "You can," I said firmly. "It's my money and I decide what I spend it on. Think of it as an early birthday present." "Thank you, Grandpa." Dean's voice trembled. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just take me for a ride when that hottie of yours starts up." We both laughed, and I felt a warmth spill inside. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something I wanted to do, not because I had to. Tuesday morning, I woke up to a rattling sound. The door to my room swung open so sharply that it hit the wall. Richard stood on the threshold, his face red with anger. He was clutching some kind of paper in his hand. "What the hell, Dad?" He shook the paper in front of my face. "What the hell is this?" I sat up slowly in bed, trying to focus my eyes. 7:30 in the morning. Too early for this kind of noise. "What are you talking about, Richard?" "This." He tossed the paper into my lap. A bank statement. My bank statement. $300 to Dean? Another $50 at the drugstore? And this at a time when we barely had enough for the mortgage? I folded the statement neatly. So Richard's keeping tabs on my accounts. An unpleasant discovery, but not surprising. "It's my money, Richard. My pension." "Your pension?" He let out a short laugh. "Who feeds you? Who puts a roof over your head? Who takes you to the doctors?" "I paid most of the money for this house," I reminded him quietly. So what? You think it's cheap to keep an old man? Richard started pacing around the room. Do you know how much your medications cost? And the special food? And when you broke your glasses last month? I was silent. Every word he said was like a whiplash. I didn't ask for special food. Marion was the one who insisted on diet foods because she didn't want me to go into the hospital and hang bills on them. I give you most of my pension every month, I finally said. Isn't that enough? Not enough? Richard stopped and stared at me. Dad, we're in debt up to our eyeballs. The mortgage, the car loan, Dean's tuition. And you're spending money on some motorcycle parts? It's a gift for my grandson. A gift? He shook his head. You live in a world of your own. Dean doesn't need presents. He needs an education. And for that we need money. Your money, by the way. Marion appeared in the doorway in her bathrobe, a look of concern on her face. What happened? I heard screaming. Dad's decided he can spend money left and right while we're trying to make ends meet, Richard said. Marion looked at me, and I saw in her eyes not surprise but confirmation of what she'd always thought of me. A burden, a problem, an extra mouth. Kermick, she began in that tone you use with naughty children, we've discussed this. All expenses have to be coordinated. We have a mortgage payment next week. I know about the payment, I said, and I always give you the money on time. But part of the pension is mine. I have the right to spend it as I see fit. Richard laughed, but it was a bitter, angry laugh. Yours? Dad, are you serious? Without us, you'd be living in some cheap apartment or nursing home. We took you in, took care of you. And you? I sold my house so you could buy this one, I reminded him, feeling a wave of anger rising inside. I'm a co-borrower on the mortgage. Without me, you never would have gotten the loan. And I'm supposed to be grateful for that for the rest of my life? Richard stepped closer, hovering over me. You know what my financial advisor told me? That with the market value of your old house and your contribution, you've already gotten everything in full over the years. Food, lodging, medicine, everything you owe us. Owe? I felt something breaking inside. You think I owe you something? Don't you? He crossed his arms over his chest. Who lifted you up when you fell apart after Mom died? Who kept you from falling asleep? Who made sure you took your meds, made sure you ate? I was silent, stunned. Is this really how he sees the past? I didn't fall apart after Elizabeth's death. I grieved. And I'd never spiraled down, a couple of glasses of wine in the evenings to drown out the loneliness. Yes, the first few months were hard, but I got through it. By myself. Until Richard convinced me to sell the house. I appreciate your concern, I said quietly. But that doesn't mean I have to give you my entire pension. Really? Richard leaned over, his face a few centimeters from mine. Where are you going to live on the remaining $100 a month? What will you eat? Who's going to drive you to the doctor? I'll find a way. Oh, really? He straightened up and shook his head. You know what, Dad? I'm done. Either you give me your entire pension, every dime, or you pack your bags and get out. We'll see how you do on your own. Richard, Marion exclaimed, but there was more surprise than disagreement in her voice. I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. When had that smiling boy who loved fishing and superhero comics turned into this cold, calculating man? Are you serious? I asked. Absolutely. His eyes were hard as stone. I'm tired of your antics. I'm tired of you thinking you're the center of the universe. Either you play by our rules or find a place in a state-run nursing home. Let's see if you like sharing a room with 3 other old men like you and eating scheduled meals. I got out of bed slowly. My legs were shaking, but not from fear, from anger. Anger that had been building up for years. I'm going with option 2, I said, looking my son straight in the eye. What? His confidence wavered. I'm leaving. Tonight." There was silence. Richard and Marion exchanged glances. They hadn't expected this. They thought I'd be scared, obeying, like I'd always done. "Don't be silly, Dad," Richard finally said. "Where will you go?" "It's not your concern anymore." I went to the closet and pulled out an old suitcase, the same one I'd come here with 3 years ago. "Give me an hour to pack." "Dad, you can't just—" "I can." I looked at him with a hardness I hadn't expected from myself. "You gave me a choice. I did. Now get out of my room." Richard opened his mouth to say something, but instead he just turned and walked out, dragging Marion with him. I sat down on the bed, suddenly feeling weak. What am I doing? Where am I going to go? I have some money in my account, but it won't last long. Friends? Many are already dead, others have moved in with their children or into nursing homes. My eyes fell on Elizabeth's picture on the nightstand, her smile, so warm, so alive. I remembered our last serious conversation when she already knew she was leaving. "Kermit," she had said then, holding my hand with her skinny fingers, "don't let Richard take the house away from you. He's always been too practical, too much like my father." "He's our son, Liz," I objected. "He's not like that." "He loves you in his own way," she smiled weakly. "But he's never understood the value of things that money can't measure. Promise me you'll be careful." I promised, and broke that promise the first chance I got. With a heavy sigh, I began to put things away. Some clothes, a few books, a scrapbook of photos, medication, wallet with the remaining cash, papers. It all fit into one suitcase, a pitiful summation of 78 years of life. When I left the room, Richard was standing in the hallway. His face was tense, but not so angry. "Dad, let's talk," he said softly. "You realize you're not going anywhere." "This is ridiculous." I silently walked past him toward the stairs. "Dad," he followed me. "You can't just walk away. You're sick, you're old, I'm still your father," I interrupted him at the top of the stairs, "and I deserve the respect you're not giving me." "Respect?" He was starting to get hot again. "What about respect for our family, our rules, to our financial problems?" I shook my head and started downstairs. In the living room, Marion was sitting on the couch pretending to read a magazine. She looked up when I walked in. "Kermit, don't do anything stupid," she said. "Richard is just upset. We can all come to a compromise." "Compromise?" I stopped. "Give me the whole pension or get out. What kind of compromise is there, Marion?" She looked away, unable to find something to say. I headed for the door, but I was stopped by Richard's voice. "If you leave now, you may not come back." I turned around and looked at my son. There was something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Fear? Insecurity? Or just the realization that his bluff hadn't worked? "That's exactly what I'm planning," I answered. At that moment, the front door swung open and Dean flew in. His face was anxious. "Gramps, what's going on?" He shifted his gaze from me to his father and back again. "I got your message." "What do you mean?" "I'm leaving." "Your grandfather decided he could live on his own," Richard said sarcastically. "Decided to play the independence game in his old age." "What?" Dean came up to me. "Grandpa, where are you going?" I put my hand on my grandson's shoulder. "I can't stay here anymore, Dean. Your father made it clear that I'm not welcome in this house." "Dad, what have you done?" Dean turned to his father, accusation in his voice. "Don't you dare talk to me like that," Richard cut him off. "This is between me and your grandfather. Stay out of adult business." "Grandfather, please." Dean looked at me again. "Stay. We'll work this out. I can drop out of college, get a job." "No," I said firmly. "You're going to go to school. That's out of the question." "But where will you go?" I thought about it. Up to this point, I hadn't had a clear plan. But now, looking into my grandson's worried eyes, I realized I couldn't just go nowhere. "I have a friend," I said. "Floyd Janandy. We work together at the plant. He lives not far from here." "Floyd?" Richard frowned. "That old drunk from the machine shop?" "He's not a drunk," I said calmly. "And he's my friend, the only one left." Dean hugged me tightly. "I'll visit you, Grandpa. Every week." "No, you won't," Richard intervened. "As long as you live under my roof and I pay your tuition, you'll do as I say." "Then I'll move out," Dean answered simply, not letting go of me. "Get a part-time job, live on campus." "And lose your scholarship?" Richard shook his head. "Don't be ridiculous." I pulled away from my grandson and looked him in the eye. "Your father's right, Dean. You need to study. It's important. And I'll be fine." "You promise?" "I promise." I gave him another hug, then picked up my suitcase and headed for the door. As I stepped out onto the porch, I turned around one last time. Dean was standing in the doorway, his face contorted with pain. The figures of Richard and Marion loomed behind him, blurred like ghosts. "I'll call you," I said to my grandson and started down the stairs. Each step was difficult, not because of my aching joints, but because of the weight on my heart. I walked down the street where I knew every house, every tree. Cars were passing by. People were going about their business. No one paid attention to the old man with the suitcase. I was invisible to them, as in fact I was invisible to my own son all these years. But the strange thing was that with every step I took away from Richard's house, I felt my shoulders slump. It was as if the invisible weight I'd been carrying for years was getting lighter. For the first time in a long time, I made the decision on my own, not out of fear, not out of duty, but because it was the right thing to do. I didn't know what lay ahead. I didn't know if Floyd would take me in, if I'd have enough money, what would happen in a month or two. But I knew one thing. I would no longer live in a house where I was disrespected, where my dignity is trampled into the dirt, where my pension is valued more than I am. Elizabeth always said, "It's never too late to start over, Kermit. It's never too late to remember who you are." And so I walked the streets of Williamstown, a 78-year-old man with arthritis and an old suitcase, and felt a forgotten feeling stirring inside. Not despair, not fear, not bitterness. Determination. Floyd Janandy's auto shop was located on the outskirts of Williamstown, in an industrial area that had once been bustling with life, but now most of the buildings were vacant. The sign, Janandy and Sons, had long since faded, and the sons were long gone. One had moved to California, the other had died in a car accident 15 years ago. All that was left was Floyd himself, a stubborn 72-year-old Lebanese donkey who refused to retire despite arthritis and 2 heart attacks. I stood in front of the iron gate, feeling the suitcase pulling my hand away. Inside the workshop, music was blaring, the old rock and roll we listened to when we were young. Through the ajar door we could see the lower half of the car, lifted up on a hoist and feet in soiled overalls. "Floyd!" I called out, stepping inside. The music faded, and a stocky man with a mop of gray hair and a thick beard stained with machine oil rolled out from under the car. "Kermit?" He squinted his eyes at me. "What the hell are you doing here? And what's this?" He nodded at the suitcase. "I need a place to stay," I said without preamble. "Just for a couple days until I could find something more permanent." Floyd wiped his hands with a rag, studying me with an attentive gaze. We'd known each other for almost 50 years, working at the steel mill together, going fishing together, getting drunk together after hard shifts. He was at my wedding. I was at his wife's funeral. That kind of friendship doesn't require much explanation. "Did your son kick you out?" he asked bluntly. I nodded, seeing no point in lying. "Well," Floyd tossed a rag on the workbench. "Let's go upstairs. I've got a couch and some whiskey. I think you need both right now." Above the workshop was a small apartment, 2 rooms, a kitchen and a bathroom, a bachelor pad, a little run down but clean. Floyd set my suitcase by the couch and pulled a bottle of Jack Daniels and 2 glasses from the cabinet. "Tell me about it," he said, pouring 2 fingers. I drank, feeling the whiskey burn my throat, and began my story. About selling the house to help Richard, about the monthly payments from my pension, about the growing tension and neglect, about the gift to Dean and the last fight. Floyd listened in silence, occasionally refilling my glasses. When I finished, he shook his head. "You always were too soft, Kermit. I told you back then, don't sell the house. Don't trust that little trickster." "He's my son," I sighed. "So?" Floyd snorted. "My Raymond is my son too, but that doesn't stop him from being an asshole. He hasn't called in 6 years, can you believe it? 6 years. And then he shows up and asks for money for a new business. Did you give it to him?" "Of course not," he laughed. "I told him to go to hell. And you know what? He found the money elsewhere, and now he has his own construction company in San Diego. Sometimes kids need a kick in the pants, not a helping hand." I smiled weakly. Floyd had always been straightforward. Maybe that's why we were friends. He'd say things I was afraid to even think. "So what now?" he asked. "What's your plan?" "A plan?" I shrugged. "Find a place I can afford. Maybe a part-time job." "At your age, with your back?" Floyd shook his head. "No, man, you need another plan. You need to teach that ungrateful puppy a lesson." "What kind of lesson?" I asked tiredly. "He's already made up his mind. To him, I'm just an expense that's suddenly not paying off." Floyd leaned forward, a sly gleam in his eyes. "You said you were a co-borrower on the mortgage, right?" I nodded. "And the money for the payments comes out of your account, automatically?" "Yes, every month on the 15th of the month." Floyd smiled broadly, showing a gold tooth. "Then you have leverage, my friend. Big leverage." I looked at him blankly. "What are you talking about?" "You can cancel that payment," he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Just go to the bank and say, 'I don't want to pay for a house I don't respect anymore.'" I wondered. The thought wasn't a new one. It had flashed across my mind back when I'd found the deeds to the house, but it was one thing to think it and another thing to do it. "I don't know, Floyd. It's a big step." "Isn't kicking your old dad out on the street a big step?" He shook his head. "Kermit, sometimes you gotta be tough. You've been giving and giving all your life, and this is how you've been repaid. Maybe it's time you reminded your son that without you, he wouldn't have a roof over his head." I looked out the window. The sun was setting, coloring the sky orange. Somewhere out there, a few blocks away, Richard was probably celebrating his victory. He thought he'd gotten rid of a burden, but kept access to my pension. "You're right," I finally said. "Time to teach him a lesson." Floyd clapped me on the shoulder. "That's my friend. Now let's get some dinner. I've got some great chops and potatoes. It's not as good as your Elizabeth's, but it's better than the diet crap your sister-in-law fed you." I slept on Floyd's couch that night, but for the first time in a long time I felt at peace. It was as if the weight I'd been carrying for years was starting to lift off my shoulders. In the morning, we had breakfast of scrambled eggs and bacon, real bacon, not the skimmed strips Marion called healthy breakfast. "So," Floyd said, pouring the coffee, "what's the plan of action?" "First we need to go to the bank," I answered, feeling an unusual resolve. "Cancel the automatic payment." "Right," Floyd nodded. "And then?" "Then," I thought, "I need to find a place to live, something I can afford for the rest of my pension." "Don't worry about that," Floyd said. "You can live here as long as you need to. Frankly, I'm glad to have the company. I'm tired of talking to wrenches. I can't abuse your hospitality." "Nonsense," he waved his hand. "Besides, you could help me in the shop. It's not a big deal. Taking clients, taking notes. I've never been much for paperwork." The offer was tempting. A little extra income, a roof over your head, and most importantly, a sense of usefulness. Not to be a burden, but to be a partner. "Thank you, Floyd. I'd love to." It's settled. He slammed the table. Now get dressed. We'll go to the bank and then I'll show you the shop. You'll love it. I've got a '57 Chevy there. It's a real beauty. The First National Williamstown Bank was in the center of town in an old brick building with columns. It was cool and quiet inside. The young woman behind the counter directed us to a manager named Brian, a thin man with a neat beard and thin-rimmed glasses. "What can I do for you, Mr. Walsh?" he asked, looking over my paperwork. "I want to cancel my automatic mortgage payment," I said bluntly. Brian raised his eyebrows. "May I ask why? Is there some kind of problem with the loan servicing?" "No," I shook my head. "It's just a change of circumstances. I don't live in this house anymore." "I understand," he nodded. "But you're still a co-borrower on the loan. That means you are jointly and severally liable for the payments." "I know," I replied, "but I don't have to make them from my account, do I?" Brian thought for a moment. "Technically, no. The bank cares about the fact of timely payment, not the source of funds. But I have to warn you, if the payments are late, it will affect your credit history too." "I understand the risk," I nodded. "In that case," Brian pulled out a form, "we need to fill out an application to cancel the automatic payment. This will take effect from the next billing period." I signed the paperwork feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and satisfaction. This was a decisive step, a point of no return. Now, Richard would either have to pay the mortgage out of his own pocket or face the consequences. As we left the bank, Floyd clapped me on the shoulder. "Well, that's the first step. How does it feel?" "Weird," I admitted. "Like I'd done something wrong, but right at the same time." "It's called standing up for yourself," Floyd grinned. "It's unusual, isn't it?" I smiled weakly. It's really unaccustomed. All my life I'd tried to be good. A good son, a good husband, a good father, avoiding conflict, compromising, giving in. And that's what it led to, my own son kicking me out the door when I became unfavorable. "You know," I said, Elizabeth warned me, said Richard was too practical, too calculating. "She was a smart woman," Floyd nodded. "I wish you'd listened to her then." "Too bad," I agreed. We headed toward Floyd's pickup, but then my phone vibrated. A message from Dean. "Gramps, where are you? I need to talk to you. It's urgent." I showed the message to Floyd. "Grandson," I explained. "He wants to meet." "So meet," Floyd shrugged. "I can wait." I texted Dean that I'd be at the park in 20 minutes. It wasn't far from the bank, a small park with a fountain and benches, where we sometimes walked when he came for the weekend. Dean was already waiting when I arrived. He was sitting on a bench, tapping his foot nervously on the ground. When he saw me, he jumped up and came running towards me. "Grandfather," he hugged me tightly. "I was so worried. Are you all right? Where did you spend the night?" "Easy, easy," I patted him on the back. "It's okay. I'm at a friend's house. I have a roof over my head and food." We sat down on a bench. Dean looked tired, like he'd been up all night. "Dad said you left on your own," he began. "That you made a scene over the money." "No wonder," I sighed. "Your father was always good at turning facts in his favor." "I knew that wasn't true," Dean shook his head. "You never made a scene." "What else did he say?" Dean looked at his hands. "He forbade me from talking to you. Said you were a traitor, that you abandoned your family in their time of need." I felt a wave of anger rising inside, but I held it back. There's no point in turning Dean against his father even more. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think it's bullshit," Dean said firmly. "I've known you your whole life. You've never betrayed anyone." I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling proud of the young man. He showed more wisdom and compassion in his 18 years than his father did in his 45. "Thank you, Dean. That means a lot to me." "So what really happened?" he asked. "Why did you leave?" I told him the truth. The whole truth, unvarnished. about how his father had demanded his entire pension, about how he threatened to kick me out, about how I chose to leave with dignity, not live like a beggar in a house I'd helped buy myself. Dean listened, and his face grew darker and darker. "I didn't know," he said quietly when I was done. "I guess something was wrong, but I didn't think it was that bad." "Your father's not a bad man, Dean," I said, though I wasn't sure I was anymore. "He's just confused. The money, the job, the mortgage, it's all weighing on him." "That's no excuse," Dean shook his head. "You're his father, my grandfather. He had no right to do that." I didn't argue. Looking at my grandson's outraged face, I suddenly realized that he was the one I'd been fighting for. The right to be not just an expense, but a human being, worthy of respect. "What are you going to do now?" Dean asked. "Move on," I answered. "Floyd had a job for me at the shop. Nothing complicated. Paperwork, phone calls. What about a house, a mortgage?" I hesitated. Should I tell him my decision? But Dean deserved to know the truth. "I canceled the automatic payment from my account," I said. "Now your dad will have to pay it himself." Dean whistled. "He's going to be furious." "No doubt," I nodded. "But that's his problem. I'm not going to sponsor a man who doesn't respect me anymore." "That's right," Dean said firmly. "I would have done the same thing." We were silent for a moment, staring at the fountain. The water shimmered in the sunlight, creating little rainbows. "Dean," I finally said, "I don't want you fighting with your father over me." "Too late," he grinned wickedly. "We already had a fight. I told him what he did was mean." "You shouldn't have." "I should have," Dean said stubbornly. "Someone should have told him the truth." I sighed. Stubbornness is a family trait. Elizabeth always said Richard and I were more alike than we were willing to admit. Maybe that trait was at its best in Dean. "He forbade me to see you," Dean continued. "Said if I talked to you, he'd stop paying my tuition." "What are you going to do?" Dean smiled, the same smile I remembered from Elizabeth when she was up to something daring. "What I'm already doing, seeing you in secret. He can't know." "Dean." "No, grandfather." He held up his hand. "It's not up for discussion. You're my family. I'm not going to leave you just because my father decided to." I felt a lump come up in my throat. All my life I'd hoped my son would grow up to be a good man, but I guess all my hope now lay in my grandson. "Thank you," I said quietly. Dean squeezed my hand. "You're welcome. Just take care of yourself, okay? And keep your phone on. I'll be texting." We talked some more, about college, about his motorcycle. The part had been ordered and would arrive soon, about plans for the summer. Then Dean looked at his watch and sighed. "I should get going. I have class in an hour and it's a long drive to campus." We hugged goodbye, and I watched him walk to his car, tall, slender, so much like the young me. There was the same determination in his gait that I had seen in the mirror once long ago, which I lost somewhere along the way. When I got back to Floyd's place, I found him rummaging around under the hood of the old Chevy. "Did you get to see your grandson?" he asked, still working. "Yeah." I sat down in the chair next to him. "His father forbade him to communicate with me." "I?" And he decided to break it. I couldn't help but smile. Floyd laughed. "Good boy. Who would he go to?" "His grandmother," I answered. "Definitely a grandmother." Floyd closed the hood and wiped his hands. "Ready to start a new life, partner?" I looked around. The garage was old, a little neglected, but it felt alive. Tools hung on the walls, rags smelling of machine oil, engines half disassembled. This was a real place, not a sterile room where I was allowed to exist on a bird's license. "Ready," I said, and for the first time in a long time I really felt it. The month flew by. Spring was gradually turning into summer, and the days were getting longer and warmer. Through the open window of the little apartment above Floyd's studio came the smell of blooming lilacs and freshly cut grass. I sat at my desk, sorting through invoices and parts orders. Over the past weeks, I'd settled into my new role as a sort of receptionist in Floyd's shop, taking calls, keeping records, dealing with customers. Nothing complicated, but it made me feel useful and gave me a little extra income. Floyd insisted I get a third of every order I handled. "You've doubled my customer flow," he'd say, waving away my objections. Before, half the calls just disappeared while I was digging under cars. It was true. After I got the shop's affairs in order, there were more customers. I set up an appointment system, kept a log of regular customers, even made a simple website with the help of Dean, who would sneak in every week. Every 15th I received my pension, in full, without having to give most of it to Richard. It was a strange, almost forgotten feeling to be in charge of my own money. I could afford to buy a new pair of glasses, a pair of comfortable shoes, an occasional lunch at a small cafe nearby. I even started putting aside a small amount each month. Not much, but enough to feel some confidence in the future. Floyd didn't charge me rent, insisting that my help in the workshop more than covered the cost, but I knew I couldn't live on his couch forever. That day, June 16th, I went about my usual business of sorting through mail, sorting bills, planning orders for the next week. Floyd was tinkering with the engine of the old Pontiac, occasionally grumbling and demanding one tool or the other. "Kermick, have you seen a thin adjustable wrench?" he shouted from downstairs. "On the top shelf, to the left of the compressor," I answered without taking my eyes off the papers. "Oh, I see it. Thank you." I smiled. Over the weeks, Floyd and I had developed a regular rhythm of working together. He did the cars. I did everything else. In the evenings, we would sit on the small terrace, drink beer, and reminisce about old times or discuss the news. Sometimes we were joined by other retirees from the neighborhood, former colleagues, old friends. On such evenings, the workshop turned into an impromptu men's club with laughter and stories of the past. My phone vibrated, interrupting my thoughts. I looked at the screen and raised my eyebrows in surprise. A message from Richard, the first one all month. "Why did you cancel your mortgage payment?" Capital letters, exclamation points. The panic was clearly read between the lines. I put the phone away, taking my time to answer. So that was it. It had been exactly 1 month since I'd canceled the automatic payment at the bank. So the bank had already contacted Richard about the delinquency. The phone vibrated again. Another message. "Respond immediately. This is very serious." I took a deep breath. Part of me, the same part of me that had always tried to be a good father, felt a prick of conscience. But the other part, the part that had endured neglect and humiliation for the past few years, felt a strange satisfaction. Before I could decide whether to answer or not, the phone rang. Richard's name popped up on the screen. I hesitated for a few seconds, then pressed the answer button. "Hello? Dad!" Richard's voice sounded agitated. "What's going on? I just got a call from the bank. They said our mortgage payment is late and we're being fined. They're threatening to ruin our credit history." "Good afternoon, Richard," I said calmly. "It's good to hear your voice. How are you doing?" "Business?" He almost choked with indignation. "Are you kidding me? I'm in serious trouble because of you." "Because of me?" I tried to remain calm. "I don't know what you mean. Don't pretend you don't." I could hear the panic in his voice. "You canceled the automatic mortgage payment. The bank didn't get the money. Now we're facing penalties and credit history problems." "Oh, that's what you mean," I said, as if I'd just remembered. "Yes, I canceled the payment. I don't live in this house anymore, if you remember." "But you're a co-borrower," Richard shouted. "You're responsible for the payments." "Maybe," I agreed. "But nowhere does it say that I'm the one who has to make the payments, especially since you're the one who kicked me out the door." There was a pause. I could almost physically feel Richard trying to control himself. "I didn't kick you out," he finally said in a quieter voice. "You left. After you demanded that I give you my entire pension or get out," I reminded him. "I chose the second option." "Dad," his voice became almost pleading, "I wasn't myself. I overreacted. You know what a difficult time this is. The bills, the mortgage, Dean's tuition." "Yeah, I know," I nodded, though he couldn't see it. "That's why I've been helping you all these years. Gave up most of my pension. And we're grateful for it," he hastened to assure me. "Very grateful." "We are." I couldn't help the irony. "I thought I was just a burden to you, an extra mouth to feed, a man who drops food and says the wrong thing in front of guests." Another pause. Richard clearly didn't expect me to memorize his words. "Dad," he began again, softer, "I admit I was wrong. We've all been wrong. But this is no time for hard feelings. We're in serious trouble. If we don't make the payment in the next few days, foreclosure proceedings could start." "So, make the payment," I said simply. "I can't." I could hear the desperation in his voice again. "We don't have that kind of money right now. Marion had to cut back on her hours at work. My bonus was cut. We were counting on your help, just like I counted on yours when I sold my house to help you with the down payment," I said. "Just like I expected to live in a family where I was respected and not tolerated because of my pension." "Dad, please." Now he was openly begging. "I understand you're offended, but don't ruin our life because of one quarrel. Think of Dean. He could be without a home." Mentioning my grandson was a clever move. Richard knew my weakness. "Dean can always live with me," I replied. "I don't have much room, but there's room for a grandson." Are you in touch with Dean?" I could hear the suspicion in his voice. "Does it matter?" "I forbade him to see you." Richard flared up again. I knew he wouldn't listen to me. "He's a grown man, Richard. He's 18. He can decide who he wants to hang out with. As long as he lives under my roof." "A roof I helped you acquire," I reminded you, "and which you could lose if you don't make the payments." Richard made what sounded like a strangled groan. "Dad, let's not fight," he said in a different tone of voice. "I understand that you're hurt. I apologize for what I said. I really do. Let's just forget it and start over. You can go home." "Home?" I grinned bitterly. "To the little room at the end of the hallway, where I'm supposed to be quiet and invisible until it's time to give my pension." "No, indeed. It'll be different, I promise. Marion and I have talked it over. You'll be a full member of the family." "What about my pension?" I asked directly. "Do you still expect me to put it towards the mortgage?" The pause dragged on. Obviously, Richard wasn't ready for such a direct question. "Well, not all of it, of course," he finally muttered. "We can agree on some amount, a fair share." "That's it," I nodded to myself. "So nothing has changed. You still see me only as a source of money." "That's not fair, Dad. We're a family. We're supposed to help each other." "Family?" I felt a wave of bitterness rising inside. A family doesn't kick their elders out the door when they become unprofitable. A family doesn't demand to give their last. A family doesn't shame its members in front of guests. "Dad, I was wrong." There was despair in his voice. "I admit it. What else do you want me to say?" "Nothing, Richard," I replied calmly. "I don't want to hear anything. I want you to finally understand one simple thing. I'm a human being, not an ATM. I have feelings, dignity, and the right to respect. I respect you, Dad." "No, you don't." I shook my head. "If you did, you wouldn't have called me only when you realized you wouldn't get the money for the mortgage." There was silence. I could only hear Richard's heavy breathing on the other end of the line. "What do you want?" he finally asked in a muffled voice. "What do you want?" "Nothing," I answered honestly. "I just want to live in peace, manage my money, and see my grandson whenever I want." "What about the house? The mortgage?" "That's your problem, Richard. You're a grown man. It's up to you." But you're a co-borrower. If the house is repossessed, your credit history will suffer. At my age, credit history doesn't matter so much anymore, I grinned. Besides, I'm sure you'll find a way out. You've always been resourceful. Dad, please. His voice trembled. Don't do this. Don't destroy our family. I'm not destroying the family, Richard. I just stopped letting myself be destroyed. With those words, I pressed the disconnect button. The phone rang again almost immediately, but I didn't answer it. After a minute, it went silent and then beeped, signaling a new message. You're going to regret this. I put the phone away and walked over to the window. Downstairs, Floyd had finished working on the Pontiac and was now washing his hands at the old sink. His movements were confident, calm. He was whistling something to himself. I think it was an old Beatles song. I took a deep breath. A strange feeling came over me, a mixture of guilt, satisfaction, and some new, unfamiliar freedom. I didn't want to hurt my son, but I couldn't continue to live my life as a convenient ATM either. The phone vibrated again. This time, the message was from Dean. Grandpa, are you okay? Dad just called you. He's freaking out. I smiled and replied, I'm fine. No worries. Just a little family talk. He was yelling at Mom, something about a payment in the bank. What's going on? I wondered. Should I drag Dean into this story? But he's already involved whether I want him to be or not. I canceled the automatic mortgage payment from my account. Your father only found out about it today. Pause. Then, wow, no wonder he's on edge. What's going to happen now? I don't know. It's up to him. Can I come over? I want to talk in person. I agreed, and we arranged to meet in an hour at a cafe near the workshop. I went downstairs to tell Floyd I was leaving for lunch. Is something wrong? He asked, noticing the look on my face. You look worried. Richard called, I answered. He just found out about the canceled payment. Floyd whistled. How's he doing? Panicked, I smiled involuntarily. Threatening, begging, blaming. The usual. And you? I told him it was his problem. Floyd clapped me on the shoulder. I'm proud of you, man. You finally showed some character. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, I admitted. Maybe I'm too tough. Hard. Floyd shook his head. After everything he'd done? No, my friend, that's not cruelty. It's justice. Donna's Cafe was a small, cozy place with red leather couches and black and white photos on the walls. I was sitting by the window, sipping my coffee when Dean showed up. He looked worried, his hair disheveled, his shirt untucked. Grandpa! He sat down across from me. What happened in there? My father was out of control. I told him about our conversation, trying not to sugarcoat it, but not to sugarcoat it. You see, Dean, I finished, I don't want a war. I just want to be respected. Dean twirled the salt shaker thoughtfully in his hands. You know, they do have money problems, he said finally. I heard him and Mom talking about it. Dad's bonus was cut and Mom only works 3 days a week instead of 5. The clinic is downsizing. I'm sorry to hear that, I said sincerely. But it doesn't justify what they did to me. Of course not, Dean agreed quickly. I'm not defending them. I'm just saying that the situation is really tense. And what's going on now? After my call? Dean sighed. They're fighting. Loudly. Mom blames Dad for ruining everything. Says she should have just asked you for help instead of demanding it. Dad yells that you're selfish and a traitor and that you're doing this on purpose to mess with him. I shook my head. Typical Richard, always thinking the world revolves around him. What do you think? I asked. Dean looked up at me. I think you're right, Grandpa. They treated you like an ATM machine, not a family member. That's not right. Thank you, I squeezed his hand. Your opinion is important to me. But I'm worried, he continued. If they can't find the money to make the payment, the bank might foreclose on the house. Where will we live? You can always live with me, I said. Floyd has another room upstairs. It's not much, but it's fine for a student. What about Dad and Mom? They're adults, Dean. They'll find a way out. We talked some more. Dean told me he had exams next week and then his summer internship started. He'll be working for an engineering firm, not for money, but for experience and references. I'll come up on weekends, he said, if you don't mind. Of course I don't mind, I smiled. I like spending time with you. As we said goodbye, Dean hugged me tightly. Hang in there, Grandpa, and don't fall for your father's manipulations. He's a master at it. I won't, I promised. You hang in there too. And focus on your studies. That's the most important thing. When I got back to the workshop, I found that I'd missed 5 more calls from Richard and a dozen messages. I looked through them without opening them. Judging by the previews, there was everything from threats to pleas. The last one read, "If you don't want to help, at least pay back the money we've given you over the years." I grinned. The money they'd given me? For what? For my house that I sold, for my pension that I was giving away, for the years of silently enduring humiliation. "Is everything all right?" Floyd asked, noticing my expression. "Yeah," I answered, putting the phone away. "It's just that Richard can't get over it." "He'll get used to it," Floyd shrugged. Sooner or later he'd realize that the freebie was over. I nodded, though I was still struggling with conflicting feelings inside. I didn't want to hurt my son, didn't want to destroy his family, but I couldn't continue to be invisible, existing only for the sake of my pension. In the evening, sitting on the terrace with a bottle of beer, I watched the sunset. The sky was colored in orange and pink tones, reminiscent of a watercolor painting. It was the kind of sunset Elizabeth and I liked to watch from the porch of our old house. "Did I make the right choice, Liz?" I quietly asked the sky. "Or am I just taking revenge on our son for years of neglect?" There was no answer, of course. Only a light breeze moved the leaves on the trees, creating a soothing rustle. My phone vibrated again. This time it was Marion calling, for the first time all month. I considered answering it, but decided I'd had enough drama for the day. Whatever my decision, I needed some peace right now. I turned my phone off and took a sip of my beer. Tomorrow would be a new day. Tomorrow I would be stronger and clearer on what to do next. And today, I just wanted to enjoy this sunset and the feeling of freedom that, despite all the doubts, filled my soul. I woke up to a persistent knock on the door, not a bell, but a knock, a sharp, demanding knock. The clock showed the beginning of 9 in the morning. It was too early for the workshop's customers, and the knock was not on the garage door, but on the apartment door. Putting on a robe, I went to the door and asked, "Who's there?" "Open up, Dad. It's me." Richard's voice. I wasn't surprised after last night's conversation. It was to be expected that he wouldn't leave it at that. But I didn't think he'd come so soon, so early. I opened the door. Richard stood on the doorstep, unshaven, his eyes red from sleep, his shirt wrinkled. Behind him, I could see a car parked at the curb. "We need to talk," he said without saying hello. "Good morning, Richard," I said calmly. "Come on in." He walked into the apartment, taking a quick look at the modest furnishings, the sofa that served as my bed, the small kitchen table, 2 chairs, the TV on the dresser. Nothing superfluous, just the essentials. "So this is where you live now?" I could hear the barely concealed contempt in his voice. "Yeah," I shrugged. "It's not as luxurious as yours, but it's enough." "You realize this can't go on forever, don't you?" He crossed his arms over his chest. "Sooner or later, Floyd will get tired of your presence." "Maybe," I nodded. "But for now, we're both comfortable with the way things are. Do you want coffee?" "No," he cut me off. I didn't come here for coffee. I went into the kitchen and turned on the coffee maker. For me, if not for him. "Then why did you come here?" "You know exactly why." Richard followed me into the kitchen. Because of the mortgage payment. Ah, I pulled a cup from the cabinet. Have you made it yet? No, he raised his voice. Because I don't have that kind of money. We don't have that kind of money. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied sincerely. But I'm sure you'll think of something. Maybe take out a loan from another bank? A loan? Richard looked at me as if I had suggested he rob a bank. Do you have any idea what interest rates are these days? And our credit history is already jeopardized by delinquency. Then sell something, I suggested, pouring coffee. A second car, for example, or that big screen TV you bought before I left. Are you kidding me? His face reddened with anger. Do you realize this is our house we're talking about? A roof over our heads? I do. I sat down at the table, holding my cup with both hands. That's why I'm surprised you haven't thought of a contingency plan in case I stop paying. You're always so thoughtful. Richard took a deep breath, clearly trying to calm down. Look, Dad, he began softly, I know you're hurt. I understand that. I said things I shouldn't have said. I was rude and ungrateful, I admit it. Good, I nodded. I'm asking you, no, I'm begging you to come back, or at least resume the payments. If not for me, then for Marion and Dean. Dean can live with me if he wants, I said. There's another room upstairs. It's not much, but it's fine for a student. You can't take my son away from me, Richard flared up. I'm not taking anyone away, I said calmly. Dean's a grown man. He'll decide where he wants to live. Richard clenched his fists, but held back. Okay, let's say you don't want to go back. I understand that, but the payments, you could just resume the payments. I could, I agreed, but I won't. Why not? He was almost yelling. Why are you doing this? To punish me? To get revenge? I sipped my coffee, looking at my son over the cup. He looked pathetic, disheveled, scared, angry. Where was the confident man who just a month ago had threatened to throw me out on the street? I'm not getting back at you, Richard, I finally said. I just stopped letting myself be used. Used? He grinned bitterly. You're my father. It's okay for parents to help their children. Yes, I nodded, but there's a difference between helping and exploiting, between caring and controlling, between respect and neglect. I respect you, he exclaimed. No, you don't, I shook my head. You only see me as a source of money. When I stopped being useful, you kicked me out the door. I didn't kick you out, you left. After you gave me an ultimatum to give me my pension or get out, what choice did I have? Richard was silent, staring at the floor. Then he looked up, and there was something new in his eyes. Not anger, not fear, but something like understanding. All right, he said quietly. I was wrong. I admit it. I apologize. Sincerely. What can I do to prove it? To make it right? I've been thinking. Maybe he really is remorseful. Maybe this situation had finally made him realize how he'd been treating me all these years. You know, Richard, I began slowly, I'm not sure there's anything that can be fixed between us. Too much has been said. Too much has been done. But we're family. There was desperation in his voice. We have to stick together. I put my money into this house, I said, looking him straight in the eye, but you always made it clear that I was a stranger. Now you're on your own. He looked at me as if I had hit him. Those words, simple and true, seemed to shake him more than all the previous arguments. What do you mean by that? He whispered. What I said. I set the cup aside. I will no longer pay for a house where I am disrespected. I won't live like a hobo in a room they put me in out of favor. I'm not going to bear the neglect in silence just because you're my son. But what will happen to the house? To us? I don't know, I answered honestly. It's not my concern anymore. Richard's face suddenly changed. The understanding and remorse were gone, replaced by cold fury. You're a selfish old man, he said through gritted teeth. You always have been. All you think about is yourself. Really? I raised my eyebrows. Who's been thinking about me all these years? Who asked me what I wanted? Who was interested in my feelings, my desires? You wanted me to coddle you? He snorted contemptuously. You're 78, not 5. See? I smiled sadly. You don't even know what I'm talking about. To you, respect and care is coddling. That's not how it works, Richard. Not in a healthy relationship. He looked at me with undisguised hostility. You know what? Do whatever you want. Live in this dump if that's the way you like it. But don't come to me when you need help, when Floyd kicks you out, or when you get sick, or when your money isn't enough for medicine. Don't worry, I replied calmly. I'm not coming. I have insurance and a little savings. That will be enough. Insurance? He suddenly became alarmed. What kind of insurance? Medical and life insurance, I shrugged. It's not a lot of money, but it's enough for a funeral. You won't have to spend any money. What about savings? A familiar, calculating glint flashed in his eyes. Do you have any savings? A little, I answered evasively. By the way, I recently changed my will. Will? He tensed. What kind of will? The usual one. I stood up to pour more coffee. Before, everything was supposed to go to you as the sole heir. Now Dean gets everything when he graduates from college. What? Richard jumped up from his chair. You can't do that. I already did, I said calmly. Last week. Signed it with a notary. It's not fair, he was furious. I'm your son. I'm your only child. And Dean is my only grandson, I pointed out, and the only family member who sees me as a person, not a walking wallet. I'll sue, Richard threatened. I'll contest the will. I'll prove that you were incapacitated. You can try, I shrugged, but a notary and 2 witnesses will prove that I was of sound mind and good judgment. Besides, it's not a lot of money to spend on lawyers. Richard looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time in his life. Maybe he did. Maybe it was the first time he'd seen me for real, not a deadbeat father willing to do anything for his son, but a man with his own will and dignity. You planned the whole thing, he finally said. From the beginning, the leaving, the canceling of the payments, the will. Not from the beginning. I shook my head. But yes, I'd been thinking about it for a long time. I've just been hesitant to make a move. Your ultimatum was the last straw. Richard grabbed the jacket he'd thrown on the back of the chair. I'm not going to stay here and listen to this. You made your choice. I made mine. I'll see you at your funeral if I live to see it. Richard, I called out to him when he was already at the door, you know what the saddest thing is? That even now you're only thinking about money. Not about losing your father, but about losing your source of income. He froze for a moment, then opened the door abruptly and walked out, slamming it so hard that the glass rattled. I remained seated at the table, staring out the window as he got into the car and sped off with a screech of tires. Strangely, I felt no bitterness or regret, just a quiet, calm certainty that I had done the right thing. Floyd, attracted by the noise, peered into the apartment. What was that? He asked. I saw your son run out of here like he was being chased by devils. One last conversation, I said. I don't think he'll show up again. And how are you? I wondered. How am I? Is my heart broken? Do I regret what I said? Do I want it all back? I'm fine, I finally said. Strangely, I'm really okay. Floyd nodded understandingly and didn't ask any more questions. That was our friendship. We understood each other without words. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Life went on as usual. I continued to work in the workshop, to see Dean, to enjoy simple pleasures, a good book, a cup of coffee on the terrace, the occasional game of chess with Floyd or other friends. Richard didn't call or write. I learned through Dean that the bank had begun foreclosure proceedings on the house. They had failed to cover several payments in a row. Marion became depressed, blaming Richard and me for everything. Richard was drinking more than usual and blamed me for his troubles too. Dean sounded tired and frustrated when he talked about it. In mid-autumn, when the maple leaves outside the window turned bright red, Dean came to me with a large gym bag. "Grandpa, can I stay with you for a while?" he asked, standing on the doorstep. "It's unbearable at home." "Sure," I said without hesitation. "The room upstairs is free. It's just a little dusty." "I'll clean it up." He smiled with relief. "Thank you, grandfather." We went upstairs to a small room under the roof. Floyd's youngest son had once lived here, the one who'd been killed in a car accident. Floyd hadn't come in here in years, but when I asked if I could use the room for Dean, he just nodded and gave me the key. "What happened?" I asked, helping Dean spread fresh linens on the bed. "Is it something serious?" "The bank is officially foreclosing on the house," Dean answered without looking at me. "We have to move out in 2 weeks." Dad found a small apartment on the outskirts. 2 bedrooms for him and Mom. They offered me a cot in the living room. "Is that why you left?" "No." He shook his head. "It wasn't that. I could have slept on the cot. It's the atmosphere. They fight all the time. Mom cries, Dad drinks, and they talk about you all the time. How awful you are, how you betrayed them, how you made them lose everything." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "Don't be." Dean finally looked at me. "It's not your fault. I get it. They brought the situation to this on their own. I tried to talk to my dad to convince him to stop drinking and get a part-time job. I've tried to calm my mom down, offer to help her move, but they don't listen. They're wallowing in self-pity." I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly feeling tired. I wasn't 30 years old after all, or even 60. In my 78, every strong experience took its toll. "You know, Dean," I said slowly, "sometimes people can't accept the truth, can't admit their own mistakes. Then they look around for someone to blame. It's easier than looking in a mirror." "I know," he sat down next to me. It's so sad to see people who should be strong break because of their own pride and selfishness." We didn't talk for a while. A crow cawed outside the window, reminding us that the world goes on with its life despite our dramas. "What are you going to do now?" I finally asked. "With college, I mean." "I'm going to keep going," Dean said firmly. "I have a scholarship that covers tuition. I can pay my own dorm fees. I have a part-time job on campus. And I'll come here on the weekends if that's okay with you." "Of course it's okay," I smiled. "I like your company." "And I like yours, Grandpa." He put his arm around my shoulders. "You know, I've learned a lot from you these past few months, especially how important it is to keep your dignity, even when things go wrong." "I'm not sure I've learned a good lesson," I admitted. "Maybe I should have been softer. Maybe I shouldn't have brought it to this point." "No." Dean shook his head. "You did the right thing. You gave them a chance, lots of chances. They chose their own path." We went downstairs and I made dinner. Simple but hearty. Scrambled eggs and cheese, toast, some salad. We ate at the small table, chatting about college, the latest movies, the books we were reading. The usual grandfather and grandson conversation. No drama, no mutual accusations, no manipulation. After dinner, I showed Dean my new project, a small table made of wood that I had been crafting in my spare time. Floyd let me use part of the workshop for carpentry. Nothing complicated, just a hobby so my hands don't forget the skills. "That's great, Grandpa." Dean ran his hand over the smooth surface. "You've always been a handyman." "Yeah, once upon a time," I grinned. "My hands aren't the same now, but they're still good for simple things." We went out onto the terrace. The evening was quiet, warm for October. The air smelled of fallen leaves and light smoke. Someone in the neighborhood was burning a fire. We were sitting on old wicker chairs that I had found at a rummage sale and restored. Me with a glass of whiskey, Dean with a bottle of beer. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" Dean suddenly asked. "Dad and Mom." Will they realize they screwed it up? I don't know, I answered honestly. Some people never admit their mistakes. It's easier for them to believe that the whole world is against them. It's sad. Dean took a sip of his beer. You know, I sometimes think, what if I become like that? What if it's hereditary? You won't, I said firmly. You're different. You're more like your grandmother. You have her eyes and her heart. Dean smiled. Thank you, grandfather. It's a shame I barely remember her. She'd be proud of you. I put my hand on his shoulder. So would I. We sat for a while longer, looking at the stars that were beginning to show in the darkening sky. Then Dean went to unpack, and I stayed on the terrace pondering the vicissitudes of life. Once upon a time, I had a house, a wife, a young son. I dreamed of a happy old age with my family, of babysitting grandchildren, of my son taking care of me, of us gathering around the big table on holidays. The standard American dream. That's not what life had in store for me. Elizabeth left too soon. My son didn't grow up the way I'd hoped. I lost my home. Twice. And here I am, at 78, living above a machine shop, working as an administrator, and my grandson has run away from his parents to live with me. Not the kind of ending I had envisioned, but in a strange way I felt happy, or at least peaceful. I had a roof over my head, a job that was fulfilling, friends who respected me, and a grandson who loved me just for being me. Not too bad for an old man who a month ago was just a walking wallet. By the time Dean returned to the terrace, I was dozing off in the chair. He touched my shoulder softly. "Grandpa, let's go inside. It's getting chilly." I opened my eyes and smiled at him. "You know, Dean," I said, getting up, "I'm glad you're here." "Me too, Grandpa." He helped me up. "Me too." We walked into the house and I closed the door behind us. An old lamp was burning on the table, casting a warm light on the walls. There were muffled sounds coming from the workshop downstairs. Floyd was still working, humming something to himself. Ordinary sounds. An ordinary evening. But it was a special evening for me, because I finally realized one simple truth. Family isn't necessarily those you're related to by blood. Family is about people who see you as a human being, who respect your dignity, who value you not for what you can give, but for who you are. And by that definition, I had a family after all. Small, unfamiliar, but real. And that was enough.